please join me in welcoming Michael Eamon from Trent University. So Michael, you are the principal at Traill College. That's one of your official things you do at Trent, yes?
That's right, yeah. So Trent, everybody knows Trent University, and if you don't, well, come on visit. So Trent has 5 what they call university colleges, and the one that I'm at is Traill College, and that's where Trent University started over 60 years ago in downtown Peterborough. So I'm happy to be part of that, but we're also part of the bigger university. You may know the bigger campus where the other colleges are, and it's a fun, happening place.
And so Traill College is named after Catherine Parr Traill, yes?
Of course, yeah. And when Trent was founded, they had 2 colleges, Peter Robinson College and Traill College. Traill College was an all-women's college. So not only they named it after Catherine Parr Traill, prominent woman in the region, but they put their money where their mouth is, and every building at the college is named after a prominent woman who demonstrates some sort of literary or other talent. And so that lasted for almost 10 years, and now we're fully co-ed and welcome everyone, but I think at our soul we still sort of have a feminist,
And it's interesting because Traill was on the chopping block then. When we lost Peter Robinson College, I won't go into the politics of all that, but Traill was almost met its demise, yes?
Oh yeah, no, and actually a third of the property was sold off.
Oh.
And so my job over the past 10 years has been trying to revitalize it.
Eat the top of that, front of that.
Trying to revitalize it and bring it back.
That's great. And you just got the new Jill and Bennett Amphitheater. Tell us quickly about that.
Yeah, so part of this revitalization is Traill is downtown, we're part of the community. We want to be part of the art scene, and we are part of the art scene, but we needed a performance space. So the Jill and Bennett Amphitheater is a 3-season amphitheater for over 100 people for all sorts of theater, music, spoken word, and that's all at Traill College right now.
Yeah, it's very exciting, and we're hoping to partner on some performance and animating it with Fourth Line. That's part of the goal. But you're also a historian, right, Michael?
I am. I'm going to do this.
Yeah, you're going to take it off?
Yeah,
that's easier for you?
Yeah.
All right, better. Okay, you're almost there.
All right. Yeah. Unfortunately, okay, we'll see if this works.
Okay.
There we are.
I will help.
There we are. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Now you wish I was in the quiet zone.
No, okay, I want people to hear you. So you're a historian.
Yes.
And is it about printmaking?
Well, I look at 18th century print culture. I'm what they call a pre-Confederation historian. So my specialty is what happened before 1867. And in particular, I look at print culture in the 18th century, so the 1750s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, in Canada, and all the wonderful things that happened around print. Because if you read newspapers, you probably hung out in coffee houses. And if you hung out in coffee houses, you probably went to theater. And if you hung out in theaters, you probably were part of a club. And so there's this whole culture of sociability that surrounded print culture. And so that's what I look into, is how to be social and sociable in the 18th century, particularly with this literary community that loves language, that loves coffee, and loves theater.
That's so great. Now we could talk about that whole thing another day, but what you're here to talk about, and why I bugged you, because you also have knowledge and expertise around the Irish diaspora. So I'm so curious, because this play is about settler culture, and about specifically the culture of the Irish Protestants and Catholics who came here. Can you tell us a bit about the earliest of the Irish settlers who came here that we know of?
Yeah, definitely. Irish migration to Canada has been happening for hundreds of years. The biggest migration, the biggest diaspora, of course, was in the 19th century. But if we look further back to that, to the 18th and 17th century, they say between 1700s and to about 1850, 450,000 Irish came to Canada, mainly through Quebec. You get on a ship in Cork or in Dublin or one of the cities, sometimes in Liverpool, but really Irish migration is coming from Ireland. And you go 6 to 8 weeks on that boat, in that ship, and you come to Quebec City. You go to Gros Isle, which was a quarantine station later in the 19th century. You get cleared through that, if you're lucky, and then you move on to what was Upper Canada. So, but before the migration, the Cavan Blazers, that time period, lots of Irish came to the cities. They came to regions such as Halifax and Nova Scotia. They started moving into Quebec. Sherbrooke and Eastern Townships have a lot of Irish there. And then, of course, where I'm from, Eastern Ontario, Ottawa, and then into where we are here. So lots of different waves of Irish migration.
Yeah, and I was just talking to somebody who, their people were sort of on the Quebec side around the Pembroke area. There's a number of communities there that were very Irish heavy. I think I was talking to Katie, whose son Dare is in the show.
Yeah, and it's very fascinating. We can get into the politics and the passions of the Irish. I just came back from 3 weeks in Ireland, just for this, so I could get myself.
I know, it was perfect. I'm so glad you went.
And you see firsthand the passion of the people. And historian Donald Atkinson, who's one of the experts in Irish history, said, one of the great things about the Irish is they sure make things interesting, right? They brought. He wrote a book on Ogo Art Gowan, who opened the first LOL, and I'm not laughing here, the Loyal Orange Lodge, #1 in Blackwell, Ontario.
Wow.
And so he talked about how the Irish, love them or hate them, Protestant or Catholic, they sure animated everywhere they went.
And so people of great pride and people who are multi-generations descended away from Ireland still really wear their Irish pride with very deeply and on their shoulder or whatever, on their sleeve, right? Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. And there's so much to the culture, right? And there's so much in common, right? It's 32 counties, but of course 6 are in the north and 26 are not. But they talk about the 32 counties. They talk about the 4 provinces of Ireland. There's still a sense of the Irish as a whole, but also the Irish very clearly have distinct identities within that whole. And a lot of that is predicated on being Protestant or being Catholic. And a lot of that identity is also being put on, are you English? Are you Irish? And the Irish have had a long history of people thumping them, right? So you had the Normans come in and they tried to take over and things became a little French, the de Clares and things like that, the de Burghs, those types of things. Then, we had a little before, there was the Vikings that came in and tried to take over bits of Ireland, and the Irish felt, pushed back by that. And then the, indigenous Irish had to deal with the English, and you don't mention Oliver Cromwell's name in Ireland because he was particularly cruel, but there is a long, long history of conflict, of pain, but of also passion. And so that identity is very complex, and it is both Protestant and Catholic, but it also has shared ideas and the sharedness of the landscape, but also the shared values of having others also trying to push you around and tell you what to do.
Right, it does seem that would solidify sort of a cultural belief or cement a cultural vision of oneself. So, I'm just so curious about the beginnings of the diaspora, the one that we know in this area, with the Peter Robinson migration, but they hit a period of just like bad land, too many people. Like, what causes those kinds of large waves of people leaving a place like Ireland?
Again, there's not one thing like any problem in history. It's compounded over years and years and years. Medieval Ireland, of course, there was the Irish faith. Protestant people started coming into Ireland. Cromwell, of course, the city of Galway was the last holdout from Cromwell's forces, and from medieval times to when Cromwell entered it around the English Civil War era, it was a very wealthy port, dealing with other Catholic countries. And when the Protestants came in, they cut off that trade. So when successful Catholics were in a certain region, like Galway, they had that pulled away from them. And then you had this idea of absentee landlords, and that happened more and more into the 18th century, where often the ascendant Protestant Irish became the landholders, and often they became absentee landholders, people living in England, owning the land and displacing...
Sounds like early Airbnb.
Yeah, exactly, displacing the tenant farm. You have those issues when you're not there, bad things happen to the land. And so there are many things that, I'm going through Irish history very fast, and those experts of Irish history are like, whoa, it's more complicated than that. But if we kind of go quickly to, it's a lot of compounded issues, economic, social, and then the poor general public, the poor tenant farmers, then got stuck with a monoculture of the potato. And the lumper potato, introduced around 1806 or so, became the main way to feed this ever-increasing population of Irish, and famines and problems. That was, we talk about diasporas. The famine kind of spurred on the diaspora, but really, there are many famines in Ireland. We may have heard of Jonathan Swift. Remember, he made a modest proposal that we should eat the babies of the Irish.
I was just reading it recently and helping my daughter study for AP English multiple choice, which is hell.
So clearly there were issues with famine and the tenants, the poor not getting enough to eat way back with Jonathan Swift. Go another 100 years and things just exacerbated, and the potato was seen as the solution, but in fact everybody was eating the same type of potato, which was prone to a late blight. And when you have a late blight hit your potato, it turns into mush. And you start having famines. There were several famines, and many ways of Irish immigration in the early 19th century were often tied to different famines. But of course, it was 1846, 1847 where the Great Famine happened, where 1 million Irish left the country. Over 1 million, almost 2 million, died of starvation. And of the million that left Ireland, over 10% came to Canada. So this, if there was already pathways of Irish coming to Canada, and there were, things were exacerbated by the Great Famine. Now, if you talk to people in Ireland, everything's political. So you translate the Irish Great Famine, it actually is Great Hunger, not Great Famine. And some people will say that's because hunger was intentional. That's because the English, the Protestants, the people in charge, did not do what they could have done to stop the famine. So there are even things such as a natural disaster like that has very political overtones. And I think that is, you have to see Irish culture as beautiful, rich, warm, passionate, but also there is this deep divide, and it can be deep divides in the culture.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that you're saying that, because so we're getting sort of 100,000 people just in that one sort of year and a half, 18-month period coming here. When you think about it, why do you think they bring those old hatreds from Ireland here with them for what people are going to see in the play tonight? Those religious divides, those distrusts and those hatreds.
I just think it's so well ingrained that it's hard to disenfranchise that. There are two things happening. I think, that kind of hatred, honestly, the tenant Protestant Irish farmer and the tenant Catholic Irish farmers kind of looked the same. They were they had similar issues, similar problems. What was very clearly different was one was Protestant, one was Catholic. And when you look the same, you sound the same, you're doing the same kind of activity, how do you differentiate that? Well, you say, that fellow did this to your grandfather. See that house over there? That house. So that kind of oral history, the kind of overemphasizing what had happened at a very young level and revisiting those things is very, very important, right? It may have happened 50, 60, 100 years ago, but it's important to have that story. And so I think a lot of people brought those stories, and when you leave a country, even out of that kind of distress, you still want to feel an attachment to home. So instead of embracing Canadian culture, and let me tell you, Canadians did not embrace the Irish. The people that were here, the English, the Scottish, the French, did not always embrace the Irish. The tension between Catholics and Protestant Irish, that's part of the story. If you're from the Ottawa area, anyone from Ottawa here, ever heard of the Shiners' War?
No, tell us.
The Shiners' War is when Irish fought French Catholics. So Irish Catholic lumbermen fought French Catholic lumbermen over control of the timber trade in Ottawa. And so that had nothing to do with Protestantism versus Catholic. It was English versus French. And in many ways, even here in Cavan and in Ontario, when it came push to shove, when the Irish were asked, what language of instruction do you want? Both Protestant and Catholic Irish said, we want English language, we don't French language instruction. So there's also kind of weird, you're trying to delineate who you are and who you're not, and everyone around you, there's all this kind of self-fashioning in the colonial setting. Everybody's trying to be something special, they're trying to carve out their niche, and I think the Irish, to help carve out their niche, look back to where they came from. And the other thing we have to realize, Robert talked about it, about the high number of Protestant Irish. Some historians say half of all Irish were Protestant, some say 60% were Protestant, and Robert was saying in this area 90% were Protestant. So you have also a very proud majority group trying to make sure that nobody takes away their status as the majority group. So I think there's two things happening. There's people trying to fit in the new world, bringing old world traditions and stories and sometimes hatred to kind of fill in their identity and the craziness and uncertainties of the new world. But you also have, especially here, the Protestant majority saying there's no way we're going to lose. It's tough enough being a Protestant here. I'm not going to lose anything to these Catholics, right? And there's that sense as well.
But it is interesting to think of Ireland and Rwanda and Serbia and Croatia during the war, like othering of your next door neighbor. I mean, the stories in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis is unbelievable. People who grew up and lived next to each other, but because of some perceived cultural difference, slaughtered each other.
Well, that's the power of Robert's play, and I think, you know, I teach this pre-Confederation history, but I also teach public history, or how we talk about history outside of the classroom. And what Robert does with these plays is incredible, because being able to, this isn't a classroom, this is theater, right? And to be able to talk about these things, to give people the space and the time to think about that exact issue. Kim, is so rare. When do we have time to sit down and think about hatred? When do we have time to sit down about cultural differences? And it's really scary, because there is something very human about being very cruel and not thinking a thing about it. And what is that? All of us here would never murder their neighbor. But there's a great book about, I won't say great because the outcome isn't great, but there's a well-written book about the Holocaust, and I'm sure Robert has read it, where this one village in Poland, systematically one side of the village murdered the Jewish side of the village. What does that to someone? And I think this play helps bring that out. And I guess then it is a cautionary tale. A lot of people say, Michael, oh, you're a historian, you live in the past. I'm like, no, I just worked there. We all should, you know, we should all look at the past as warning, but also as information, and help build understanding in the present. And you know, Kim, I think one of the saddest things is we're in a world where people don't want to understand things anymore, and that's when Rwanda happens. That's when you know, Ukraine.
Well, we see polarization, and I think that's why the play feels very very right now to me. Is what we're seeing in Canada, the United States, is real polarization, and there are these kind of very strong two sides right now in this country, and I think in the U.S. And people have sort of pushed away and aren't talking to each other. And I don't know if talking to each other is enough, but I do find it fascinating that people who, you know, have the same socioeconomic situation, the lower working class, and yet they have been polarized from each other along lines that have been constructed maybe by the rich. Maybe it's all about power and money.
Well, that doesn't hurt me. You know, the rich really do a good job at messing things up, right? You know, because they kind of tend, you know, the absentee landowners. If you're not there, you don't actually know what's happening on your land. You don't see the tensions, right? You think everything is fine, right? You know, there's a real reality of being disconnected from a real issue of being disconnected. But you know, you're totally right, and I think the value of this place, again, making us think about this disconnect, because we are all privileged in our own way now, so we need to think about that. But I also feel that with the Irish diaspora, time heals a lot. You know, I was talking to an Irish historian in Ireland who said, you know, well, I said, you know, in Canada today, a lot of those tensions between Roman Catholics and Protestants don't bubble up. It goes, oh yes, well, my uncle, you know, still is an Orangeman and feels this way. I'm saying, I'm sure your uncle feels that way, but I'm sure he's not part of the vast majority. And I feel that time does heal all wounds. And I think we, as Canadians, we see there are bigger problems out there, and we sometimes have to let go of the past. And I think that's the other thing too about the past. I think the past is great, but sometimes you have to let go of the past and forge a future with togetherness. And you know, whether it's raising a building together, Catholic or Protestant, or doing something, more of that needs to happen where you can see that we are all
like a barn raising, like you might see in our play tonight.
No spoilers, but you know.
I know, it's early enough in the play, it's not a spoiler. I'm curious, because it's so interesting, so my grandpa was an Orangeman. He hated all French and Catholics, which was very interesting. And he marched in every Orange Parade until the last year he was healthy, 1981, and he belonged to the Loyal Orange Lodge on Brock Street in Peterborough, which is now gone. But we were borrowing some props for this from the Orange Lodges around that still exist, and we needed some top hats. And they said we couldn't have them until after July 8th, because there still is an Orange Parade on the Danforth in Toronto, and I was sort of taken aback. I was surprised that it is still happening. I mean, a lot of those folks have passed on now. When we first did this play, there's a song in the second act, and the Orangemen used to come as audience members in their regalia and sing along with the actors, which was disconcerting for the actors. Less people probably know that song now than they did 30-odd years ago. But it is interesting. I'm curious, you were just in Ireland, and I know they had this incredible boom. Maybe it was being part of the EU, and there was the tech boom there. What is it like for young people there now?
That's a great question. It's not great. I talk to a lot of people in museums and in stores and shops and things like that, and a lot of young people are like, oh, you're from Canada, I want to go there, or Australia. A lot of young people are saying, we need to get out and go to Australia or Canada. And the irony or the coincidence is that people have always been Ireland's greatest export. You know, and as I said, hundreds of thousands came in the 18th and 19th century, over 100,000 in 1 year. You know, those numbers went down, but still thousands. And a lot of those Irish who stopped in Canada then went down to the United States. But you know, there's this diaspora is also intellectual diaspora, and I think one of the sad things for Ireland is that it hasn't stopped. And I think there may have been a bit of a few years around, you know, the millennium that you know, they embraced Europe and there was a lot of money available. But I feel Ireland is now starting to feel depressed again, and employment and the rest for you.
Just give me a sense of Ireland right now. Is it a completely intact country? Does England control any part of it? I know there's the Republic, but do they have any of sort of the six counties or any of that, or Ireland is a completely whole place?
It depends on your mentality and what you think of Ireland. In the Republic, you see signs that point to the north, and they don't say Northern Ireland. They tell you what city you're going to, right? Okay. It's this idea there's 32 counties, and 6 of them, of course, make the north, or Ulster. There's 4 provinces: Ulster, Leinster, Munster, and Connaught. And you know, Ulster is the north. Northern Ireland is its own country. It is part of the United Kingdom, or Great Britain, I should say, and the United Kingdom, and it has its own government. It has the pound. There's a lot of issues with Brexit, to what to do about the border between, you know, Northern Ireland and the rest of the Republic, which uses the euro and is part of the European.
Okay.
You know, so tensions never go away. You know, and there's some sad tension. Russia is one of those histories where it's a very sad, passionate history, and Ireland is another place where it's a very sad but passionate and wonderful history. And I feel they're just coming into another era of tensions and you know, especially with what to do with the Brexit and Europe.
Right, very interesting. And this area is such a, going back historically, such a hotbed, maybe all of Canada is, but these enclaves that became either Catholic or Protestant, so Ennismore and Douro and Keene and Indian River became very, very Catholic. This area stayed very Protestant. And then, of course, we had the Peter Robinson settlement, and Robinson brought 2,500 out?
2,024 settlers in 9 ships came here from Cork.
Just from Robinson. We're right now working on a play about that. But it's so interesting to think of this whole area being so in some of the original settlements from the Irish.
When again, you know, you have to look at the big picture when you think of diasporas and immigration. The Irish were the laborers. They were not well respected, both Catholic and Protestant in different ways. Yeah, some ascendant Protestants did have nice positions. The Duke of Wellington was a ascendant Protestant, right? And that's why we have Douro around here, because he was also his relationship to Portugal. But, you know, there was a lot of poor Catholic and Protestant Irish, and the challenge was the other Canadians or the other British around them put them into secondary positions. The Rideau Canal, 1,000 Irishmen died making the Rideau Canal. And then when that was ended, you had all these laborers hanging around Ottawa, and that's when the Shiners' War started, because they went into the timber trade and they found the French were already there and they started fighting the French over, you know, so the Irish had to fight hard. They've always, fighting Irish is not you know, a coincidence. They've always had to fight hard, both Protestant and Catholic, and they fought really hard to establish themselves in Canada. And part of that, again, is when you are fighting others, you have to turn back to what you know. And sometimes that's good, that's music, and it's culture, and sometimes it's bad, it's hatred and division.
That's great. I'm just mindful of your time and everybody's time, so I'm going to wrap up. Is there anything else you think I've missed or that we should know about the diaspora?
No, except that so many over 4 million Canadians consider themselves, you know, have Irish heritage today, over 4 million, and I think there's just about 5 million in the Republic and 2 million in the North, so that's pretty incredible, and people are still coming here, and I still think, you know, I'm from Eastern Ontario, where I come from, is very Irish, and has that influence, and here it's very influential, and I always find it fun. When I was in Ireland, I went into a corner store and I looked at the refrigerator, and the refrigerator had on the block, you know, where it was made, and it said, Baby Burrow Cabin.
Did it really?
It did. And I took a picture of that, and I'm like, isn't that cool? You know, and one final thought is, you know, we haven't talked anything about the indigenousness of the land, and that's a whole different conversation, but Joseph Brant, that great statesman, once said, you know, the British have done so much for this place, they've changed the name of everywhere in it. And, you know, we see that with not just the British, but the Irish as well. All these names have a really special rooting to those people and help them make that transition across the Atlantic.
Michael, thank you so much for spending some time with me and letting us know a little bit more. We think that people who come on Fridays get this extra special window into the play with Robert tonight and with Michael as well. So would you all join me in thanking Michael Eamon?